Greetings and good afternoon. My name is Lyndon Hewling, and I work at the Center for Student Involvement here at UC Davis, and we're really happy to have you join us. I'd like to also introduce Sherry Atkinson, our Executive Director of our Community Resource Centers, as well as Paul Cody, the Assistant Director of the Center for Student Involvement. You'll be hearing from all three of us today as we talk about free speech versus hate speech. What is our role and responsibility? So briefly to get started, these are our goals for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about defining freedom of expression. We're going to review why we protect free speech. And then we'll have an opportunity at the end, hopefully, to discuss how we can respond to offensive speech. And additionally, we're going to discuss how we can support students and respond to concerns. So first, to get us started, we have a sort of a brief overview. The first thing we wanted to share was just talking about freedom of expression broadly. So free expression is at the heart of our educational mission. Oftentimes, you'll hear the university setting referred to as a marketplace of ideas, and that's something that's truly foundational to UC Davis and the student experience. And the key component to this being a marketplace of ideas is the idea of everyone having the opportunity to freely express their opinions, their ideas, so on and so forth, in a space that feels safe and welcoming to everyone. Additionally, the university is oftentimes the first opportunity for many students to hear opinions, ideas, ideologies that may be new to them. And that is a very important part of student development coming to this campus and something that we want to protect and support, not only as a division, but as a community. The college campus is where we often come to discuss some of the most important and controversial ideas of our time. One of the great things that I really enjoy about UC Davis is that in many ways it's a microcosm to not only the state of California, but really to things that are going on around the globe. I really enjoy coming to work because I have the opportunity to talk to students about current issues, things that are going on with them in their everyday lives, things that are impacting them outside of the classroom, and really value that as an important part of the student experience. Additionally, activism is an important piece of this that we are going to talk about as well. Activism is a very important part of freedom of expression here at UC Davis. It can often be a jarring aspect of this conversation, but that is oftentimes the point. And it really is also a valuable part of what students take away from their time here. So why do we protect free speech? Well, it's in the First Amendment of the Constitution, and so that's one reason that you can fall back on, definitely. Additionally, we truly trust that our students, staff, and faculty and community members have the ability to make their own decisions about the things that they hear. So oftentimes, walking around our campus, you're going to hear things that you maybe don't agree with, that really rub you the wrong way, or really maybe trigger some things as well. But we trust that as students experience these different viewpoints on our campus, they'll have the opportunity to think critically about them, discuss them, and ultimately come to their own conclusions. No one person has the right to truly decide what's okay to hear and what's not okay to hear. Additionally, it protects everyone's voice, and that's a really key component of this conversation. Oftentimes, we may hear things that we disagree with or that we don't think belongs here or that perhaps doesn't support the principles of community. And while those things impact us personally, we need to remember that while we may not agree with someone else's opinion, it is important to protect that opinion because we're also protecting our own voice and our own experiences here. And so it's important to protect everyone's voice as much as possible. Okay, and now I'm going to transition over to Paul, who's going to talk about the next portion of this.
So one of the things that I want to say is the difference between free speech and hate speech. Just because we're protecting free speech does not mean that we agree or support hate speech or the messages of what people are saying. But my practice has been is oftentimes protecting free speech. Well, I was speaking with Sally Alexander earlier, and she works with international students. And when they've come here, they've been blown away that they have the ability to say whatever is on their mind. Sometimes we take that for granted, that that's a right here that is not a right in many parts of the world. So oftentimes it's those folks that are marginalized that those rights are taken away first. So I always say, I don't want to be put in a position of choosing what is right or what is wrong or what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, because what might be right or acceptable today may not be in 6 months or 6 years, So I think it's really important that we protect all of those voices. So in terms of defining whether speech is protected, there's a few questions that we ask. What is the nature of the forum in which the speech occurs? There's the difference between public institutions and private institutions. Private institutions have a much greater ability to determine what can be said or what not can be said, and can set a higher degree of parameters. Some of the other forums are whether it's inside a building, outside of a building, and things of that nature. So the forums. If there's, if someone wanted to bring signs up and scream and yell in the background, that might be okay with us. But if we set up what the parameters are at the beginning of the event, then we have more ability to tell people what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But if I don't like what this side of the room is saying and this side is doing the same thing but a different message, I can't pick and choose. You can say it over here, but you can't say it over here. Are limits on expression reasonable and narrowly drawn time, place, and manner regulations with respect to the pertinent forum? We always get a lot of questions about who's seen the preachers usually out on the quad? They're fun. And sometimes people just listen to them for entertainment purposes. But people say, why can't you restrict them or put them in a particular place on campus? The entire campus in outside areas is a free speech zone. So if they were to enter buildings or block doorways, those are some of the restrictions we can put in place. So that's that. We're going to go back. So all speech is protected except these. Is it obscene? An example is child pornography. If it defames someone, if I say something that's untrue about Lyndon, that is not protected speech. Is it commercial speech? Someone can't come on here and say whatever they want about commercial speech. Those are things where we can restrict. Does it involve illegal conduct? Is the intent of the speaker to communicate? Generally protected, or to disrupt? Generally not protected. Incites illegal activities, those are fighting words, or the burning building, those are not protected speech. And these are the two important ones. Actionable harassment. And I'll go back to the preachers. People always say, oh, what it really comes down to is the generic harassment is it's directed at a particular person. And when I interact with students who come to us asking about the preachers, what I usually say is a lot of the groups, and oftentimes they're from off campus, they come to campus, and they talk in general terms. And in general terms is not a violation of their free speech. So they can say, all left-handed people are bad. All bald guys are bad. And that's why it's protected. And other people come and really, particularly when it's outside, you are not a captive audience. So anyone can walk away from that. If you are in a classroom, it's a much different setting, and that's where this changes. And then the harassment based on a protected characteristic. And oftentimes it's more about the two parameters that when we meet with campus council to discuss a lot of this, the two things, is it directed and is it persistent? It needs to be directed to a person, and usually over the course of time, not just one afternoon. Well, we'll get to questions. So this is not an easy process. We're sometimes put in a situation where people sometimes announce they're coming to campus and sometimes they don't. things happen organically, and we have to sometimes go out there and make a determination. Sometimes we can go out there and say, can you move over that way? A lot of the groups from off campus, they know exactly what their rights are, and they put it right up to the line. So we often have to use discretion in dealing with time, place, and manner regulations. And sometimes it could be a violation of policy and procedure, but to enforce that or get something to happen, the consequences might not be worth confronting that. If someone puts a sign, a banner on a wall. Dissent does not necessarily equal disruption. And that's one of the great things is, going back to that freedom of expression, is we want people to voice what they want to say. So I'm going to turn it back to Sherry, or over to Sherry.
All right, so we're going through a lot of material, kind of getting through some information to set the framework, and then hope to have more of a conversation with you all as we move forward. So the next piece is, what does this have to do with us? What's our role in all of this as student affairs professionals or folks who work with students? And I really see our role in two general categories. First, it's helpful to understand the First Amendment and free speech so that when students come and say, why is this allowed? Why aren't we stopping this? That we have the context and the framework around free speech. The second piece I think that is important is certainly free speech often impacts campus climate negatively, right? So the things that people are allowed to say can be quite offensive. I really resonate with the previous cartoon of, I'm all for free speech until I disagree with what's being said, you know, and this is where I have lots of cognitive dissonance around it, because I know that if someone was starting to decide about who could say what when, that those with the most power and privilege in our society would end up making those decisions, and that the voices that are already marginalized would continue to be marginalized. So it's hard sometimes when I hear the folks making oppressive comments to think, why can we allow that? And so I see our role as student affairs professionals in doing a number of things to support students, educate students, and address campus climate issues. So folks can say hateful things that make people feel excluded on our campus, and we can't tell them not to. We won't win in a lawsuit. I mean, that's been proven historically. So what can we do, right? What can we do with that information? I see it as we can provide education about the issues that people are speaking hatefully about. I think a lot of the centers that I work with, a lot of the folks in the room, we do education about creating a more inclusive campus climate, providing information to people on how to serve communities who are historically been disenfranchised, and how to help create a better campus climate overall, so that these types of messages are not the norm, that's seen as something absurd and outside of the characteristics of our university. And then also providing them that support when they are hearing those things and those negative messages. What can we do to support students and empower them to do what they want to do and respond in a way that they want to respond, that helps them feel more empowered and have a presence on our campus about, you know what, okay, you can say that, but we're going to say this, and this is what I'm about, this is what we're about. That provides another opportunity for people to enact their right to free speech as well. That really kind of sets the tone and pushes back on some of the negative message as well. So I would say that kind of summarizes it. Certainly we don't want to be a part of escalating bad situations. I get triggered by lots of things that people say while exercising their right to free speech. And so I can see how students might want to engage and argue with that, and faculty and staff as well, because it's so egregious that we don't want to let that go on. But then we have to think about how we engage with that as well, as you know, staff at the university. And certainly encouraging dialogue, debate, talking about education, about issues, impact of words, and those types of things. So I didn't want to read you this. I think that's kind of how I would summarize that piece. So we were going to do small groups. We're just trying to figure out how to manage the time, but I think we'll just open it up. I see folks in the room I know who aren't afraid to speak, so I think we'll count on y'all. But just some ideas on how can we respond to offensive speech on our campus. So I threw out a few ideas, other things that folks, ideas that you might have that you want to throw out, things that maybe you've done. or your students have done that you've seen be powerful. So.
When I used to work at the MU, and I would see the religious kind of fanatics out front, and had a lot of those conversations with students about just disengaging and not participating in that back and forth debate, because they're kind of fueling the fire and want the argument and want that. So in some situations, it's best to just walk by and not engage in that unproductive conversation.
I actually, if one of my students that works for me would, and this has happened in the last few years, would say something offensive either about someone, maybe not even in our department, someone across the hall or something, I immediately, if I hear it, if I'm not even in the room and I hear it, I'll go find that person, take them out of that situation, away from other people, into a private area, and talk to them about it and why I was offended, or about whatever they were saying, and try and explain to them, do you see where the other person might be, or this is do you see how you could have offended this other person, or and trying to just explain it to them, take a moment and let them stand back and see how what they were saying could be so offensive.
Great, thanks. So kind of responding on an individual level, pulling someone aside, having a conversation with them to educate about the impact of their words. So maybe people's intentions weren't negative necessarily. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I probably didn't mean to be offensive, but here's the impact it probably or could have had on other folks. So, great. What else? Other ideas? Behind you.
I think the idea of helping somebody reclaim their power, right? Often part of what's hard is when you hear things that are offensive, it's often because it's very painful or difficult. And you can reclaim your power in a number of ways. It can be in a very individual way. So if the person is saying something that you actually believe, kind of, it's actually much more painful, right? And if you can say, wait a minute, there's part of me that believes that because I was socialized this way. I was told these messages, but there's another part of me that knows this is not true. And sort of how do I reclaim power individually this way, or how do I reclaim power in a more community-based way? Do I want to create ways to help people who are dealing with the pain of these messages, and how can I help them, right? And that could help me reclaim my power. And helping students think about what would help you reclaim your power in that moment, I think can be really helpful.
Right, thank you. Other thoughts, ideas? I know one of the things that some students did one year when I was the director of the at the time, LGBT Resource Center, now LGBTQIA Resource Center. I wasn't even out there, was one of those hate preachers, but the students came back in, they're like, with a wad of money, and they're like, here. And they said, we put a hat up, and we said, because this guy was spewing homophobic remarks, and people were like, "Here, donate to the LGBT Resource Center," and he was collecting money, or they were collecting money while this guy was speaking, and so they came back with like all these, here's, and I was like, "Oh, that's great," and that felt very empowering to them, and it also was like taking that opportunity and for people to show I'm not for what this guy is saying. They had an opportunity to kind of pitch in, so I thought that was kind of a cool example of ways that students have done this across the U.S. in different venues whether it's a hate speech around whatever venue, they'll set up a booth and people make pledges. For every hour that the speaker is here, we're going to rate, people pledge to give you so much money. So the longer they stay, the more money it makes for the cause that they're against. So it kind of puts them in a bind. So those are very creative. All these things I think have students came up with these ideas so as well. Another piece too in terms of systemic change is that I have some pamphlets, brochures on the thing there by the projector about reporting hate and bias. So we have created a system, a centralized system where people can report hate and bias incidents. So if they've experienced something, they can put it in. It's reporthateandbias.ucdavis.edu. There's wallet cards and some brochures and it tells you the process. So really, we've worked hard over the last year to implement a process that's more clear and transparent to students, also that is something that's going to be clear around how we're addressing things and communicating with people who make reports, oftentimes different system. We had like 4 different systems. Some went into like Never Never Land and we never heard about them. And so it provides us an opportunity to respond to those on an individual level, but also we are tracking them. So if we see trends in certain areas of certain issues that are coming up, that we can think as an institution, what types of education or tools or strategies do we need to implement to address this issue that may be coming up repeatedly around a certain issue or a certain community, a certain population. Because I think we have the individual support and empowerment, and then we have the institutional change and processes that we also need to look at as well in terms of how we address these issues on our campus. What's our next? So I think what we can do now is go into, we kind of touched on this too, huh? I was going to say, I think now, I mean, we've kind of talked throughout a lot of different things that we could probably open up for more conversation, more dialogue, but Paul's got something first.
So I think like a number of years ago, my operating principle was, well, it's free speech. There's nothing we can do about it. But I think that approach was flawed for a number of reasons. The first is, if someone's coming to us hurting, I don't care about the free speech. My main priority is helping those students and getting them connected to the resources so that they can get through whatever they're experiencing. There's been too many times when this is a violation of the principles of community. And unfortunately, the principles of community are not a policy, they're aspirations, and everyone doesn't live up to them, or they're not part of the campus, so they have no idea what it is. So I think the first thing is helping students process, getting them the resources that they need, and referring them to the reporting system. A year ago, someone came to me and I said, well, I'm not really sure where you would file a complaint. And I'm so happy about this new process. It might not be a violation, but at least it empowers them and gives them a voice to what they're experiencing. One of the other things is contacting counseling services. I'm going to call it CAPS for a long time. But having professionals, if we know something's happening, sometimes we'll get in touch and say, we might have some students who are experiencing some dissonance and some real challenges when certain issues come up, putting them on notice so that they can have people available, and really just listening to students. So I just wanted to make sure that we are providing the resources for students and sometimes the staff who are offended by free speech or the content of free speech. I just wanted to make that clear. questions.
Either we
Actually, I have a, is it okay if I mention a particular situation? Yeah. My name is Moira Delgado. I work for Services for National Students and Scholars. Every beginning of summer, we recruit volunteers, and we have anywhere from 100 to 150 volunteers. And it came to my attention that last year, one of the tour guides that was a volunteer was talking to an international student about joining their church. And that international student felt really uncomfortable because, well, just because it wasn't part of their, it was a very personal question. Actually, for me, that's a very personal question too. And these groups often do really good work. They're hosting students and their families, but to me, it's kind of borderline free speech issue at the same time. And it has come to my attention, more than 2 or 3 international students have said they've joined these groups because they say they're going to host them, and then they feel like they're being recruited in the end. And international students in particular, in my experience, many of them will not file a complaint. And so it's the cultural background that they're coming from. And so I know in the volunteer training this year, I'm going to address it, but I'm also a little bit reticent to address it because of the free speech issue. And yes, I can mention principles of community, but just as you said, it's not a policy, it's these ideals that we live through. I know there's some concrete things I can do. There was a group of volunteers from an off-campus Christian organization. We give all our volunteers SIS as volunteer t-shirts. When they table, they continue to wear our shirts. So this year, I'll make it really clear. If you're tabling, you can't, no matter what organization you're part of, you can't wear the SISS volunteer shirt. But I'm just throwing out to you, how can suggestions for handling this in an appropriate, sensitive way?
That's a good one. I think we can benefit from the ideas of the group. I mean, I think one of the things that I thought of as you were talking is letting students know that they can say no if that is something they're comfortable doing, around, people engaging them in lots of different activities on campus that there's going to be lots of opportunities, and they'll want to explore the interests that they have, and that they're probably not going to be able to do everything that exists on campus, and so they're allowed to say no. Now, it's complicated because they're offering them something else. And well, and maybe it's an opportunity if there are specific groups that we're seeing this pattern, that we even have a conversation with them. Maybe they're unaware of the impact they're having as well. Other ideas on that? I think we got a lot of smart people in the room.
So I wouldn't say that's necessarily free speech. You're not looking at the content per se as much as their behavior. So I think maybe we can connect afterwards to, I guess Milt has some ideas.
Well, no, I think that's a valid concern. And, the simplistic answer to that is that education is king. And education on both sides, letting international students know who come to this campus the kinds of things that they may experience as an international student and things to be aware of. And I think the education on that side is critical. But also, if there's groups of students or folks in this community that are misleading students, manipulating situations, making students feel uncomfortable, I think there's an opportunity for us, those of us who bring students to this community, to this campus, to go to those groups and organizations and inform them how they're making students feel. So I think, we put people on notice. That's what we should do when they're making students feel uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, education is king, and we got to educate both sides.
But I'm also thinking is maybe can address the power differential, because the volunteers, the hosting family, they are providing something that the students need, and there's the power differential that makes it harder for the students to say no. And that maybe that's another perspective to address that power differential, and they can be more sensitive, aware of the power differential. Even though, yes, the students, have the right to say no, but when there's a power differential, that makes it harder for them to say no.
This is kind of a question tied to that, but what parameters are there for free speech when it can be characterized as proselytizing or trying to recruit for religious groups when we're a state institution? I thought that was, they do not mix. And so I'm not sure if there's anything in terms of free speech, in terms of what students or volunteers or employees can say or do on behalf of a religious institution.
Again, delicate question, delicate situation that we deal with on college campuses. But for us here, spirituality, we just came from a presentation around this whole topic. And there's, this whole, legal stance around church and state. And we have to be very careful about that. But in the context of spirituality, I think as institutions, we have the freedom to engage in that kind of discussion based on a person's spiritual philosophy about their life and about where they're at. And the research indicates that students who engage in these spirituality kinds of discussions around who they are, where they want to go, what they want to do, the contributions they want to make to the world, do better. And students are seeking that. And I think we are obligated as an institution to provide students that kind of spirituality experience. So, yes, it's a fine line, but I think that when we feel like we're crossing that line, we need to get legal counsel on where it is we're going and what it is that we're doing. If you look at the institutions across the country, there's a number of, and just about all the student affairs units have different councils or committees that really deal with this whole issue of spirituality. So I don't think it's something that we need to shy away from. I think it's something that we need to continue to educate ourselves on so that we can provide students with that service, but be in compliance of the law.
So in the situation that Moira described with volunteers possibly recruiting for their religious groups, how would she talk to campus council then in that situation?
Absolutely, and I think that folks who are representing the university from a volunteer standpoint, if they're representing UC Davis and they're wearing our emblem or being a part of a committee and saying that we're representing UC Davis, that becomes problematic for the institution. So again, I think that's very critical for us to educate people that they can't represent UC Davis in that manner. And again, information's king, and the more that we know about how folks are engaging in these discussions, the more we can provide the kind of guidelines and support so that they can do it in the most efficient and appropriate way.
Just simply, I know that student housing has this move-in day where volunteers from across the university can join and wear a t-shirt and help the families move into the residence halls. And top of the list when you're filling out the survey to sign up as a volunteer, it says you cannot be, this is not an opportunity to get members for whatever club, fraternity, sorority you're representing. And it's just simply stated there so people know before they actually volunteer that the department is aware that this might be an issue and this is not the time or the opportunity for them to recruit people.
So as I was saying, many of these situations are just very complex. And so oftentimes just talking through a lot of these unique situations as they occur is going to be your best strategy. And so something that we're going to share on the next slide is actually some different resources on campus that are available to help navigate some of these. As you're talking about student organizations, that's something that the Center for Student Involvement can help you navigate. But there are a lot of other resources available to you, and so we're going to have an opportunity to share that as well. So do we have any other comments or other questions that people want to add to the conversation at this point?
I think it's kind of building on what Lyndon said. I think, you know, these are good resources. I think a lot of these issues like Moira's sharing or other issues related to free speech versus hate speech can be very complex. And talking that out with colleagues or folks, you know, I think can be very helpful. So I am definitely somebody, feel free to get in touch with me. I may not have all the answers, but I'm happy to talk through situations and you know, talk to other folks if we need to strategize about how do we address concerns that students have, how do we create a campus that values free speech and is an inclusive campus climate. So I'm always happy to talk those out. And I think those are complex problems that we all probably navigate to some degree in our daily work. So just putting that out there.
So there'll be a new policy coming out, a freedom of expression policy. And it's a combination, it's just too bright over there. And it's a combination of policies that are already in place. And they did feedback in spring quarter, I think, and people raised a lot of concerns about it, that it was restrictive in nature, and just in part of the language saying you can't do this, you can't do that. We used to have a flyer when people would come to us and say, there's an issue, and we'd give them a flyer, and the ACLU said, it is too restrictive. So once that policy comes out, we're going to go back to the drawing board to create something that is easy and simple to provide to people of if there is offensive speech, what can you do, not what can you not do, but what can you do to get your message across and what resources are available. So once that policy's been approved, we'll be looking at what the resources we can develop that are compliant with that policy. And you can just switch it to the next one. So we're here to help. If you have questions at any time, or if you have students, I've spoken with Holly and the Memorial Union about their staff sometimes have to interact with people who are either doing things they shouldn't be or are doing things that they thought were a violation, and how they can interact in an appropriate way so that they don't put either themselves in harm's way or put the university in harm's way. So, any other questions? Well, we're real happy you all came. So thank you very much.